Counsel, if you're ready to continue, please proceed.
Mr. Chair, the witness is being brought in.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Mr. Mbai.
Mr. Mbai, ñu ngi la dalalat benen yoon.
I could see, Mr. Mbai, that the MOUs that you signed with the then AFPRC government.
Gis naa ne nanguto wi nga xam ne moom nga bindal nanguto sa diggante ak nguuri MRC.
One common provision was to work assiduously towards the restoration of democratic rule.
Leen na ci jubluwaay mooy pour ngeen dal di taxaw jonn na pour gis ne réew mi dina doxaat ci wàllu doxini démocratie.
Whose idea was it to include that provision in the MOUs?
Xalaati kan la pour ci seen nanguto yooyu ngeen binda ngeen boole ci loolu.
Both memoranda
ñaar ñëpp ñi ko seq
were written by me.
ñi ko bind ki ko bind na mooy man.
From there, I take it that
with the assistance of Dr. Abdoulaye Conte,
Dr. Abdoulaye Conte,
was the former Vice President of Sierra Leone,
Vice President of Sierra Leone,
who at the time had come to this country on exile, enrolled as a legal practitioner in the Gambia, and was in my chambers. We developed the memoranda.
I therefore take it that that particular provision, like the rest of the provisions, were your own creation.
Oh yes.
I noticed that this particular provision was the first provision in each of the memoranda. Why?
Seetlu naa ne ci ñaari nangutoo yi ngeen bind yëpp xalaati delluwaat ci doxini démocratie moo jamono bu ci nekk moo dee jiitu ca kaw lu tax.
I couldn't emphasize it more.
amuma dara duma ko gënoon mënoon a rëy loolu weesu loolu.
Do I take it from your answer to mean that the restoration of democratic rule was the most important issue in the discussion in your conditions to work for the military junta?
Yes.
Mun naa wax ne ci sa kàddu ni ma ko jëlee mooy ne pour réew mi delluwaat ci doxini démocratie loolu bokk na ci loo xam ne lu gën a fulal la ci wàlli nangutoo boobu nga xam ne moom nga def ci doxini njiital soldaar yi jamono boobu.
Yes, and the observance of the rule of law, respect for human rights, and good governance, even if it has to be by the military. But these were conditions that were important to me, and I insisted on them.
We would come back
to the extent that even in the letter of appointment, I said human rights must be stated as one of the affairs that I would be responsible in the Ministry of Justice.
We would come back to all these things at a later stage. For now, though, how did members of the junta at this stage feel when you insisted on these important principles, seeing that already they had suspended the constitution and together went with it all those rights that you claim should be respected and implemented? How did they feel when you were negotiating this with them?
jamono wi nga sixa waxtaan yooyu sa diggante ak soldaar yooyu nga xam ne ñoo koppoon nguur gi jamono boobu naka lañ gisee sa xalaat bii nii ndaxte fekkoon na li nga xam ne mooy woon constitution bi boobu tegeegum nañ ko boor te ñu gis ne yooyu nga xam ne moom lañ fa dàq yow yooyu nga ñëw gën koo fulaal nag mu war a doon loo xam ne dafa ànd ak sa liggéey.
They agreed with me.
dañ àndoon ak man.
And the conditions are elaborated.
ci sarta nangoto yooyu nga xam ne moom laa fi wax léegi.
And my conclusion that their stay in power would be very short.
te tamit si suma jeexal moo nekk ne seen toogaay si nguur dafa war a gàtt.
From your estimation or guesstimation, did they agree to those provisions reluctantly, considering that they have done everything possible to get you to come on board as Attorney General? Or did you have a feeling that they were committed to the same values, to the same principles that you were espousing at the time?
Yeah,
léegi ci wàlli nanguto yooyu nga xam ne yéen a ngi ko tëral seen diggante nga yow nga tegal leen ay sarta ne yow bu fekkee ne danga leen a war a liggéeyal ci sarta yooyu ngaa jaar ñoom ñu dal di ci nangu yow ci sa wàlli seetlu nag nangu boobu ñu nangutoo ak yow dañ ko def rek ñu amuñ pexe ngir fekk na jamono boobu soxla nañ la pour jël la pour nga ñëw ci liggéey bi wala boog dañ ko def ci seen coobare nga xam ne yéen a bokk benn façon yi gis-gis bi nga xam ne benn jubluwaay bi fa ngeen war a liggéey.
My impression was that they were sincere.
suma gis-gis daal moo nekk dañ ko doyloo woon.
If it were otherwise, they would not have me. Although before I joined, the suspension of the provision had already been done.
Yes, clearly the first 6 decrees were already passed, and Decree 1 suspended the Constitution and modified some of the provisions of whatever was left. But didn't you at the time sense that the military junta was desperate to appoint civilian personalities of very high standing in the society so as to get acceptability in the society instead of being committed to certain values? Couldn't you see that at the time?
seetlu la woon ne jamono boobu ñoom soldaar yooyu dañ soxla woon torop koo xam ne civil la doon doomi réew mi koo xam ne ku ñu ràññee la ku am xam-xam la ku am taxawaay bu dëgër la boo xam ne dañ ko mën a boole ci seen biir jamono boobu noonu.
That may have been their hidden agenda. But with the impressive list of the first civilian cabinet, the first cabinet, the impressive list of civilians were Gambians of high character. The impression we had was that they were sincere, that this would be the transition would be very short.
For the purposes of the record, so that Gambians would understand exactly what happened, why did you keep refusing this offer? Even up to after 3 times, you kept refusing, saying no. Why?
Pour rek waa Gambia yi war a mun a xam ci sa kàddu wax nga ne ñëw nañ ay yoon lu ëpp ñetti yoon sax pour nga jël place bi nga xam ne moom lañ la doon jox waaye nga bañ ndax di ñu mun a wax lan moo waraloon bañ yooyu nga xam ne yaa ngi ko doon bañ ca njëlbeen.
As a lawyer, as a student of political science, having observed the series of military coups in Africa and their failures, and as a Gambian, I didn't like a military government.
Comme ni lawyer la nek ko xamne ku jang political science la ak tamen gis nak military coup yu bari ci rewi Africa niñ mujjé daanu duñ mujjé mëna soti té it nek doomi Gambien bo xamne dal bëggumon nguri soldat.
Legal purists would say that military coups are illegal. They are a violent overthrow of the democratic ideals of our society. a violation of the Constitution, and therefore they ought not to be encouraged or assisted. What was your position on this?
xam-xamee luwaa seetlu nañ ne li nga xam ne moo di ay coup d'état yoo xam ne ay soldats ñoo koy faral di def dañ koy jaarale ci yoon yoo xam ne àndul ak luwaa dañoo yàq li nga xam ne moo di wàlli doxini démocratie réew ma léegi nag yow nga gis sa bopp ne yaa ngi war a jàppalante ak ñooñu naka nga ko gisee.
It seems this question was well anticipated. I could see that you have produced some dossiers to deal with this issue.
Yes, I agree with you.
I
have studied the literature on military government. And I came across the writings of Professor Theo Elias. He was the first professor of law at Lagos University. He was the first Attorney General of Nigeria. He was the first Chief Justice of Nigeria. He was the only African who became the President of the International Court of Justice.
International Court of Justice.
In chapter 6 of his book, Africa and the Development of International Law, he writes the legality of illegal regimes in Africa.
Could you read out the topic again? Because it's a very interesting choice of words.
The
legality of illegal regimes.
The legality of illegal regimes in Africa.
That is a very interesting choice of words.
Yes, it's the heading of chapter 6 of his book.
That's right. And please proceed.
And I would tender this to the Commission.
Please.
Yeah.
But read out the relevant excerpts so that we can.
For the purposes of the study of the question of the legality of illegal regimes,
there
is, in a sense, a correlation between a coup d'etat and a secession. And a secession.
Secession
transfer. While the former envisages a complete change of government, the aim of the latter is to establish a new government for a part of an existing sovereign state. In either case, the new government must be effectively established de facto if recognition is to be accorded it de jure. Instances we have cited of Nigeria and Chad illustrate this point. In the context of public international law, coups and secessions almost over everywhere involve problems of succession of states and government. Well-known precedents exist in, for example, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, as well the principle laid down in Luther and Sago. That's a case.
Yes.
And the Tinoco case in Costa Rica, as adumbrated in Great Britain versus Costa Rica.
Great Britain and Costa Rica.
This is trying to, the difference between complete succession, complete takeover, and secession. In Luther and Sago, the English High Court ruled that the Bolshevik regime brought about as a result of the 1917 coup could not legislate so as to expurgate persons in the position of British traders in timber who had supplied it to the previous government. Before the case was taken to the Court of Appeal, however, the British government had in 1921 recognized the Bolshevik regime de facto. And it was accordingly held that while such recognition did not necessarily imply an approval of the regime, its legality in international law could hardly then be doubted. And that its decrees must be respected. In the Costa Rica case, Tinoco, then Secretary of War, by using the Army and the Navy successfully, staged a coup and became the ruler of Costa Rica between 1917 and 1919. Costa Rica 1917-1919. During which certain British companies had acquired rights under some contracts with Tinoco. Tinoco's regime was succeeded by an order which enacted laws rendering null and void all transactions entered into with Tinoco. Chief Justice Taft of the United States, as sole arbitrator, held Costa Rica liable because under international law, mere change of government does not affect a state status. However unconstitutional Tinoco's government might have been under the municipal law. It was the only effective government during the relevant period. The subject of state succession will, however, not be discussed here. What we are immediately concerned to examine is the crucial question as to how a government established in consequences of a coup becomes legal and accepted in international law. Customary international law recognizes a coup d'etat as a proper and effective legal means of changing a government, provided that certain basic requirements are fulfilled.
Mr. Mbai, it appears therefore that in his book, Theo Elias was basically rehashing the Kelsenian theory of the changes of the ground norm.
The ground norm, yes.
Taking the approach from international law.
Yes. Yes.
Proceed, please. Yeah. And obviously the conditions main principles of legitimacy, recognition, effectiveness would be the basic elements that would determine, that would render what would be an unlawful or illegal regime
becoming legal. Exactly, and that's the condition the learned author said. There must have been an abrupt political change. That is a coup d'etat or a revolution. It does not matter whether the change has been effected directly by a military junta or by a civilian or group of civilians subverting the existing legal order. Without the aid of the military. There can be a coup without the use of armed force. Two, the change must not have been within the contemplation of an existing constitution. If it were, then the change would be merely evolutionary and not constitutional. Revolutionary, that is constitutional. It would not have been revolutionary. C. The change must destroy the entire legal order except what is preserved. In order for the coup d'etat to be complete, the new regime need not have abrogated the entire existing constitution. It is sufficient that what remains of it has been permitted by the revolutionary regime. And this will refer in our case to the suspension of some provisions of the Constitution. The new Constitution and government must be effective. There must not be a concurrent rival regime or authority functioning within or in respect of the same territory. In addition to this, in our case, the president had already left the country with his family.
It looks to me, Mr. Mbai,
the government had collapsed.
The government had collapsed.
And the military government was the only effective authority at the time. Its illegality became legal.
It is quite interesting. It looked to me that like the Gambian lawyers pretty much used the contents of that article as a template to solidify, to render legal the coup of July 22nd, 1994, by doing almost exactly the prescriptions of T.O. Elias in that book.
Bon dafa melni dal lawyer Gambia yi ñom dañ sukkandiku ci téré T.O. Elias bobu nonu pour nak sukkandiku ci ngir dégéral yonal lo xamné andul ak yoon ñu jël ko yonal ko ci wali coup d'état bobu xamné mo amon jamono
at the time of the military coup here I did not have possession or knowledge of this book. This was presented to me later by Chief Richard Akinjide, former Attorney General of Nigeria. Who, after my return to my practice, used to join me here and lead me in some of my major cases. Of course, in my research since then, I have come across a lot of principles, law, and politics about military coups.
But even if our lawyers did not consciously put this book down and try to follow the prescriptions one by one, it looked like they had some templates, some precedent to rely on. Perhaps maybe another person would be the best. Somebody else would be the best person to answer this question. But it looked like they took a template either from Nigeria or from Ghana on how to render legal an illegal government that came into power by coup d'etat through the decrees, the first few decrees that have been made, the suspension of the Constitution. Because the reason why I say this is they have checked all the boxes that are necessary as prescribed by T.O. Elias to render a government illegal, so rather legal when it came into power through illegal means.
Well, I was not among the team of lawyers in the Attorney General's office at the time. Although it is fair to say that what happened went in line according to Professor Elias' prescription or discourse.
Could you take that again? The interpreter missed that.
I said, it may be fair. I was in my private practice at the time of the military takeover. And was not a member of staff in the Attorney General's chambers. Although it may be fair to say that the degrees that were done, the first 6 degrees as you mentioned, agreed with what Professor Elias has said. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is a template, that they used it as a template. I don't know what they were of or not aware of.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Mike. There is often this question.
Okay.
that coups are illegal.
Ne coup d'état mom sa yuñ ko defé rek andul ak loi.
And the participants
Te ñi ko xamné ñoo def coup d'état bi.
are criminals.
Ñoom ay nit la ñoo xam def kati tafar lañ.
Would you agree to this proposition?
Ndax di nga ànd ci kàddu googu.
That if the coup fails,
ne bu fekkee ne coup d'état ba yàqu na.
the participants are criminals.
ña nga xam ne ñoo ko doon def de ay defkati tafar lañ.
Under the law.
ci ron loi bi.
If it succeeds,
bu fekkee ne nag dem na kanam niñ ko soxlaa.
there is no illegality.
Bon dafa mel ni daal amul dara loo xam ne jàdd na ci loi.
Because what was illegal as at the time it was being done
ndaxte jamono bañ koo def la ñoon def àndul ak loi de.
has been rendered legal by the fact that it's been accepted, it is effective, it has therefore acquired de facto effective status and has been legalized by reason of those elements. Would you agree to that?
I agree to that. Only to add, that even those who were aware of the attempt would be for misprision of treason. If they fail to report it to an authority. And that is why immediately the military left my gate on the 23rd of July 1994. I invited my neighbors, Jay Shady next door, and Rai Faraj opposite across the street. Join me to report the presence of the visit of the military, their offer, and my rejection. The most immediate authority I had in mind was the Inspector General of Police. I didn't have his telephone number, I didn't know where he lived, but I went to where the mother lives, who has been my client in my practice. In Old Jeswan.
It seems you did not
and let me finish. And as she was in there, we proceeded to the Imam of the area. Imam Masja. And informed him. And to the member of parliament for the area. Mr. A. Njai was my former teacher at Amity School. That in the event that they fail, I will be questioned as to why the military came to me. It is the same reason why, after the Kukoi attempt, Kukoi visited Sirif Diba in his compound. Sirif Diba called the Inspector General Abla Mbub and told him. Sirif Diba Sirif Diba was charged with misprision of treason. 55 witnesses gave evidence against him. But because he reported the matter, Kukoi's visit to his compound to the Inspector General of Police, all the other 55 witnesses were not believed accepted by the judge. And he was acquitted of the charge. As a lawyer, I knew this. That is why I took the precaution of reporting the visit of the military gate to people that I knew were authorities in the neighborhood. But on your question, I agree that if a coup succeeds, they become revolutionaries. If it fails, they become criminals. In our case, it was bloodless. It was peaceful. It was quieter than a general election. There was no visible public protest. The president has abdicated. The government had collapsed. And the military was the only effective authority in the country. But that was not even enough for me to accept to serve.
waaye nag loolu rek doytoon sax pour man ma nekk pour man ma àggale suma service.
But as a Gambian,
waaye nag ni doomi Gambien.
as a patriotic Gambian,
de doomi Gambien bu bugg réewam.
with the persuasion of eminent religious leaders, people of high caliber and respect in society.
ay boroomi daraja ay boroomi diine kilifaay diine ñoom ñëpp ak si seen wax.
And the arguments they made to me,
ki tamit nag li nga xam ne loolu lañ wérale seen i
it was
kàddu
primarily the peace and stability of the country.
mooy nag lu jëm ci wàllu jàmm ak dali réew mi.
Agreed for that reason.
man nangu nag ci dalil boobu.
And as we go on,
ci ni ñuy demee.
we'll see how practically this has been developed in my efforts for the restoration of democracy in the country.
danañ gis nag ci suma pas-pas naka la lii gënoon a dëgëri nag ci lu jëm ci wàllu
That is
démocratie.
why I did not survive more than 6 months with them.
moo tax nag mujjeewuma mun a àgg ak ñoom lu dem ci juróom benni weer.
And at this stage, it was actually lawful to accept an appointment from the military junta.
Yes, lawful, but to me on certain conditions.
Wow, ànd naa loi waaye nag ci ay yenn sart.
Which I elaborated in the memoranda of understanding and signed with them.
ci li nga xam ne feeñal naa ko ci nangatu yoo xam ne nii si ñëw naa ko ak ñoom.
And Mr. Mbai, you would agree with me that at this stage, those who worked and served with government were doing what was actually expected of them by Gambian society.
Yes.
Mr. Mbai, di nga nangu ci man ne jamono boobu ñi nga xam ne ñoo doon liggéey ak nguur gi ñu ngi doon def liggéey boo xam ne loolu la waa Gambia séntu woon ci ñoom.
Yes.
Well,
and that by serving, they were acting lawfully.
Te comme que nag ñu ngi doon def seeni liggéey ñu ngi ko doon def ci anam yoo xam ne ànd na ak luwaa.
Yes.
Wow.
I raise this question, Mr. Mbai, because people seem to be under the misconception that anybody who had served with Jammeh or in that regime at that time betrayed Gambia. Would such a statement be correct in law?
No, it's not correct in law and it's not correct in fact.
loolu nag àndut ak yoon te itam àndut ak dara sax.
And there was a rupture, there was a change, but this change became the lawful order in Gambian society at the time. Would you agree?
Jamono booba nag am na wecceeku bu amoon waaye nag ba tey sax mu ngi àndoon ak li nga xam ne noonu la ko waa Gambia gisee woon jamono boobu.
And you would agree that until the government went rogue, by going rogue, I mean until the government started blatant violations of rights, it continued to be the legitimate government of this country.
Yes. And ak man nak ba jamono ji nga xamé né nguur gi na soppali nañ seeni doxine di def ay jëf ju ñaaw di ko tek ci kaw nit ñi ba jamono bobu nit ñi ñu ngi jappé won réew mi nguur gi né nguur la bo xamné mu ngi doon dox ci yoon ñu ko soxla.
Again, I raise
even if its origins were criminal.
Yes, of course.
Notwithstanding that the origins were criminal,
yes.
The overthrow of the constitution,
yes.
The overthrow of authorities and the power, it's all illegal,
yes.
all criminal.
Yes,
continue.
It's all criminal before, but once it succeeds, it becomes legalized by virtue of its success. So anything that happens after the success becomes lawful, except where rights now start to be violated, then the whole question of whether a regime deserves the respect and the support of the people, that question would at that stage come into play. But without that, what you have is a legitimate government. Some would dispute that it's legal and would say it is legitimate. But as per Elias's opinion and as per the case law, it becomes a legal government. So that's why the title, he said,
legality.
How an illegality could now become legal.
Yes.
But I raise this issue, Mr. Chair, because there's been a lot of intellectual debate out there regarding this whole issue, the change of the ground norm, but more significantly on how Gambian society or how history should show or how people who participated after the success of the coup should be perceived.
Yes.
So I think people would learn a lot from this, in the sense that, yes, it was legal, it was lawful for people to support and do the things that they did in aid of the government. But that is only, in my book, only insofar as that government continues to have legitimacy. The moment it starts to lose legitimacy, people should not support that government. And such a government would lose legitimacy once it starts blatant violations of the rights of the people that they are supposed to serve.
Except in our case, where that same government was successfully being elected by the Gambian people. That made it worse. That made it very sad. However illegitimate, however brutal, their actions, their decrees, their conduct, Gambians, unfortunately, continue to successfully re-elect that government.
That's right. And that's another dimension. But that is perhaps for some other day. Interesting stuff. Thank you very much. We would take a look at those excerpts you have provided, and we would include it in the body of materials. So here we are. This was an illegal government, this was a legal government arising out of an illegal enterprise.
mu ngi dox nag ci yoon yi war a jaar fekk mu nga faxeekoo nag ci anam yoo xam ne ba ñoo jël nguur ga na dañ ko jaaral ci bunta yoo xam ne àndut ak luwaa.
So now you have agreed to serve.
Yes.
waaw léegi nag ñu ñëw nangu nga nag pour liggéeyal leen.
On certain memoranda of understanding.
ci ay sarta yoo xam ne ni dañ ko nangatoo.
Please proceed.
About the time when the payment of fees for my sons at university in England arose.
ci jamono bi nga xamee nag lu jëm ci wàlli pay fay njàng suma doom yi ca réewi Angleterre agsi na rek.
I raised the issue in our memorandum of association of understanding.
ci laa ekkati nag mbir moomu nag li nga xam ne mu ngi jëm ci wàlli nangatoo yi ci tegoon.
The Minister of Education was consulted.
ak ministre bi saytu woon wàlli njàng mi diisoo nañoo ak moom.
It was pointed out that there was no scholarship provision in the estimate.
ci kaw loolu na ci la wax ne nag amutoon benn loo xam ne mu ngi jëm ci wàlli sponsor ci diggante boobu.
But it was time for me to go back to England and as usual.
tey tamit boo waxtu jot na pour ma delluwaat Angleterre comme ni ma ko daan defee.
Pay the university fees and other matters for my children.
fay nag lu jëm ci wàlli njàngam suma xale yi ak yeneen.
The Englishman.
Englishman bi.
Was my student officer at the British Council at the time I was a student there.
Time bi nga xamee maa ngi doon jàng foofa.
Offered to pay it.
Bugga koo fay.
Though it was a loan.
Naam nag ab bor la waroon a nekk.
Then in October 1994.
ci weeri October 1994.
The company Louis Dias.
company bi Louis Dias.
Was paid $4 million towards the award.
ñoom nag ñu jox leen lu dem ci $9 millions ci dogal boobu nga xam ne ni ci lañ gañe woon.
And they gave me a fee payment of $650,000.
ñu jox ma nag lu dem ci juróom-benn téeméer ak juróom fukki dalasi. juróom-benn fukki junni.
Mr. Mbai, this was fee for work done prior to your becoming Attorney General?
Yes. And that was why that one led to the memorandum about my position now as Attorney General and previous position as lawyer for Louis Dias.
To
avoid any conflict that could have arisen, that I didn't disclose that I was lawyer for this and government was to pay us over $6 million.
ngir rek bañ ñu dal di jàmmarloo nag ci li nga xam ne mooy aajo
I have the documents relating to these payments to Louis Dias and to me.
If there is going to be any issue of conflict here, and I am happy, Mr. Mbai, to note that you are meticulous enough to put this down in writing in a memorandum as a potential conflict of interest issue that is settled before you took up the position. So the issue of conflict in that regard would not arise. But you would agree with me that this is only limited to the issue of the principle of the payment. It has not yet extended to future conduct on what would impact or what would influence the actual payment. Would you agree?
Yes.
Let me have my lapato lolu ci olof. D'accord gi nga d'accord ak nguur gi pour bind kayit wone ne am na diggante boo amoon sa diggante ak Louis Dias loo xam ne suñ ko toppee dafa mel ni yow am nga ite ci loo xam ne mun naa how do you wax tension in mun
naa indi féewaloo sa diggante
diggante intérêt boobu ak intérêt nguur gi ngeen tënk ko balaa ngaa nangoo liggéeyal nguur gi man li ma laajte mooy loolu soo ko seetloo mbir la moo xam ne yëfi principle bi rek yëfi xalaat gi rek la tënkaango waaye nañ koo defee ji xam nga loolu tënkut ko. And your answer was yes.
No, I said, I don't understand what you mean, the principle and the
actual execution. Because the actual execution would require activities which should be put under the microscope in order to determine whether in fact there was conflict at that time. But the issue of the general principle has already been settled. It would not be a conflict of interest for you to work for government on that particular issue. But there are certain outstanding or remaining issues on which you can only determine conflict by looking at the actual steps that have been taken. Are we together?
Yes, we are together.
And do you agree with that,
I agree with that.
Well,
that's right. So let me ask you this question, sir.
Let me comment.
Yes, please.
In this case, it is now a new government.
And the
award and judgments were made before the military takeover. That's why it was necessary to elaborate. And the offer now was made to me to serve them, to serve the government. For me, it was the best thing to do. Let them know what my position was in relation to a client who has won a major award against the government of the Gambia. Before their takeover, which was still binding on the government. I didn't want them, after accepting, to serve. And the issue later raised, only to be confronted that what you didn't tell us. To safeguard my position. To avoid any conflict of interest. This was one of the conditions of my acceptance, that this is the present position, regardless of your offer. It must be understood before I accept to serve. But I agree with you.
It was quite honorable to do that. It showed honesty and transparency. And as a lawyer, it showed high ethical standards. In principle.
And in practice. And in practice.
Well, I am coming to the practice. I am coming to the practice. We have no scintilla of evidence on this. But I ask the question. Did you use your position as Attorney General to influence the payment of a judgment debt which you know would inure to your benefit?
Ndax na da nga sukkandiku ci place boobu nga xam ne yaa woon attorney general nga sukkandiku ci nag pour mun a fayeeku dogal boo xam ne dogaloon nañ ko pour fay ko sa client ndax gannaaw boo xam ne yow tam itteel na la.
No. In fact, the payment to me
fay biñ ma war a fay sax de
became one of the adverse publicity against me.
Nekk na nag li nga xam ne nii moo gënoon a fës nag ci
by the same government.
ci nguur googu rek.
After my removal from office,
gannaaw buñ ma génnee ci office.
They used it that I was corrupt.
Dañ wax ne nag man dama nekkoon ku tapale.
That I stole.
Ne dama sàcc.
A lot of bad things. It's in the newspapers.
Wax ñaaw yoo xam ne ni wax nañ ko ci man.
Because after the $650,000 that was paid to me,
gannaaw juróom-benn téeméer juróom fukki junne dalasi yi ñu ma fay.
I paid it to my account with the Standard Chartered Bank, Banjul.
Ma fay ko nag ci suma compte bi nekkoon Standard Chartered Bank, Banjul.
With instructions.
Ci ndigal boo xam ne nii.
Credit my account with their branch.
ñu dal di dugal ko nag ci suma compte bi nekk seen bànqaas boobu.
At 2 Regent Street, London.
That's right.
For the continued support of my 3 sons in England.
Pour nag dimbali nag njàngam suma ñetti doom yi nekk ca réewi Angleterre.
Clearly, Mr. Mbai.
Mr. Mbai.
Your fee was already earned.
Yes.
You've worked for it. But the question would always remain. No. Du ñun ñoy ko laajte de. Di jaxe dina fa nekk. The question would always remain as to whether you used your position as Attorney General to influence this settlement of the judgment debt, because you knew that once that debt is paid, you would be in a position to receive your fees from Luis Diaz de Losada.
No.
Why did you say that?
I didn't use my position for the payment of the award to Luis Diaz so that my fees would be paid to me.
Jëfewuma suma taxawaay fi ma nekkoon di ministre pour nag ñu mun a fay dogal boobu ndax ma mun a jot may tamit liñ ma ci war a fay.
But you would agree with me that the specter would be there.
Waaye di nga nangu ne ba tey rek loolu moo ci nekk.
No. Suspicion bi dina fa nekk.
I cannot control suspicions.
I understand.
Munuma sàmm nag ay li nit di séntu ci man.
Were you surprised when the military government turned around and flipped it against you and suggested that you were corrupt?
Ndax bettu nga na gannaaw bu nguuri soldat ga dal di ëlbatikoo nag dal di teg mbir mi ci sa kaw di wane ne yow daal da nga njublang.
I was shocked.
Waaw bettu woon naa.
But I was not surprised.
Waaye nag nekkutoon loo xam ne ni bett.
We are only developing separate ways.
ñoom ñëpp dañ kenn bu nekk dafa jaaroon yooni boppam.
The chairman and I were becoming increasingly intolerable to each other.
mu jéegi daal man ak chairman kenn ku ne daal mënatul a masla.
Even your contract, I know it was in the form of an MOU. The inclusion of the provision that they should give scholarship, they should fund your children's education. I know it did not materialize in the end. Okay, but that by itself also was irregular, wouldn't you say so?
That
it was irregular that the government would enter into such a contract at this time for the employment of a person to a particular position.
It was fair because my employment meant a severe drop in income.
waaw ne doon ànd si dana doon jubde ndax man jamono boobu su ma tànneef
we they accepted.
da nekkoon na ndaanute koom-koom ci man te ñu nangu ko.
And at a time when I was sponsoring three of my sons at university in England.
But it would have amounted the same thing for almost everybody else, except for Bakari Bunja Dabo, Honorable. Because for Bolong Sonko, I think he was it Action Aid? But I can't recall. But
Bolong
for Bolong Sonko
was the permanent secretary.
Permanent secretary. And for Bakari
Bunja Dabo had already left with the president.
That's right.
I think came back with the offer to accept the folio put for Minister of Finance.
But your belief is that it was fair to make such a condition?
Well, yes, it was important to me. The education of my children was important to me. Well, was the driving force in my practice.
But then the junta did not in the end.
They said there was no provision in the estimates for scholarship. And gladly, I'm glad that that was what they made no for. There was no scholarship. No scholarship was needed. No scholarship was offered. Neither was it needed. So eventually, I continued to be responsible for the education of my children. And I'm happy that it turned out that way.
And of course, it goes without saying that all of them really did very well in school and became top lawyers.
Oh yes, they worked very hard. They're very determined. And with the blessings of Allah, they all succeeded.
MashaAllah.
They all succeeded. Some had 3 degrees before they came back.
MashaAllah. Okay. So, but then, this whole specter, this whole suspicion that because you are Attorney General, you know your fees are outstanding, and they are only outstanding because the government which you serve has not yet paid this judgment debt. And the fact that you might have used your position to influence the government to pay the judgment debt such that your fees would be paid, that specter still remains.
Well, unfairly. It still remains, it will be grossly unfair, because that is far from my position as well as Louis Daesh.
Okay. So you worked with this government very briefly. 7 months or thereabout?
Yeah, 8 August 1994.
August 1994.
I would say to February 1995.
February 1995.
Because after the independence anniversary ceremony,
independence anniversary
on 18 February 1995,
February 1995,
having been frustrated and harassed,
I
took the decision to go on the Umrah. On my return, my appointment was terminated. Although the letter of termination is dated 20 March 1994.
March 1994.
That was the period, officially, that I was Attorney General.
That's about 6 months,
yes.
2 weeks, 3 weeks, thereabout.
Okay.
What were the frustrations?
I've developed them in my statement, and I would like to develop up to that point.
Yes, please go ahead.
No, I would like to continue developing up to that point.
Okay. You talked about your appointment, the memoranda of understanding and the issue of the settlement from Louis Daesh, yes, and the money you paid in your bank to pay for the fees of your children. Yes. So now let's talk about the frustrations you mentioned.
Yeah.
Would those be the human rights violations?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Proceed, please, yes, and tell us about it.
During the period that I was Attorney General, 8 August,
ci jamono bi nga xamé ni la nek ministre bi seytoon wali loi réew mi
to 20 March 1995
digante juroom-ñetti fan ci wéri August be ci 1994 be ñaar fukki fan ci wéri March 1995.
I can remember the following human rights abuses and violations.
maa ngi mën a fàttaliku nag ay yenn yoo xam ne def nañ ko ci xëtt yelleefi doomu aadama.
The Vice Chairman, Sana Sabali.
ki nga xam ne moo toppoon ci chairman bi di Sana Sabali.
Secretary General Mr. Mustafa B. Wada.
Secretary General Mustafa B. Wada.
And I.
ak man.
We're on board a Brussels Airlines plane from Freetown to Accra.
dañ duggoon nag ci benn plane Brussels Airlines jóge ko Freetown jëm Accra. ci réewi Ghana.
When we are served with copies of the Gambia Daily Observer newspaper.
bi ñu joxe nag li nga xam ne ni mooy Gambia Daily newspaper.
And I read that Pa Cham.
ma ri nag jàng ne Pa Cham.
was the managing director of the Gambia Ports Authority.
moo nekkoon borom kër buntu liggéeykaay Gambia Ports Authority.
was relieved of his office.
dañ ko dàq nag ci place liggéeykaayam.
And that when he returned to the office to surrender the keys.
te bi mu ñëwee nag ci delloo ci office pour di waxee caabi yi.
He was arrested by the police and charged with trespass.
ci lañ ko jàpp nag di police yi ne daal dafa jéggi sason.
I saw the publication to the Secretary General, Mr. Wada.
ci la wan nag loolu Mr. Wada.
Who was equally distressed.
moom itamit loolu naqari woon ko.
And the Vice Chairman, Sana Sabali.
Vice Chairman bi Sana Sabali.
Who showed no interest.
moom nag amul xaajoolu toon ko.
And when we returned to Banjul.
bi ñu wuññeeku see Banjul.
When we arrived Accra.
bi ñu àggee Accra.
I telephoned the Solicitor General, Mrs. Ami Bensouda.
ci la téléphone nag Solicitor General bi Mrs. Ami Bensouda.
Instructed him to take the case file from the police.
ci la ko wax nag jox ko ndigal ne na jël nag case boobu ci loxo police yi.
And on our return to Banjul.
te bu ñu ñibbisee ci Banjul.
We terminated the court proceedings.
ñu dal di dog nag àtte boobu.
As there was no trespass.
te tamit ne amutoon benn trespass.
No any crime whatever.
amutoon benn tefaar bu mu def daal.
On another occasion.
ci beneen xew-xew.
I arrived home from work.
ma jóge bi ma wàccee nag àgg kër.
And was surprised to find Uncle Sir Aliou Jack.
maa ngi fekk nag Uncle Sir Aliou Jack.
Sitting on my veranda.
mu ngi toog na ci suma doon perong bi.
As I opened the gate.
bi ma ubbee bunta bi rek.
He painfully pointed out.
mu dal di méttilu nag.
That his son Abu Dentin, Alaji Abu Dentin.
ne doomam bi Alaji Abu Dentin.
Who had just arrived from London with his child.
mu ngi jóge ko London ak doomam bi.
Was arrested at the airport, Yundum Airport.
ñu ko jàpp na ci Yundum Airport bi.
And taken with his child and luggage straight to Mile 2 prisons.
ñu jël ko moom ak bagaasam yeeg doomam yëpp yóbbu leen ci kaso gu mag gi nekkee ci yoon yi Banjul di Mile 2.
The presence of Sir Aliou.
te tamit teewaayam Sir Aliou.
I telephoned the Secretary General, Mr. Wada.
ci la téléphone Secretary General bi Mr. Wada.
Who was in his office.
mu ngi woon ci office am.
And met him.
ma taseeg moom.
And together we met the chairman, Yaya Jammeh.
ñu dal di gisante chairman bi Yaya Jammeh.
And expressed our shock for what has happened.
wane nag suñ betteel ci li xew.
And pointed out.
wane yi tamit ne.
That was unnecessary.
ne daal loolu jaaduwutoon.
It would make the transition difficult.
te dana jafeloo na nguuri njàppandal gi.
After a plea.
gannaaw bu waxtaanee ak moom nag.
Abu Dentin was eventually released with his child and luggage.
Abu Dentin ci lañ ko bàyyi ak doomam jeeg bagaasam yi.
Subsequently.
gannaaw loolu rek.
Every time Alaji Abu Dentin was arrested and detained.
Alaji Abu Dentin ñu jàppoon ko nag téye ko benn place.
I, and invariably with the Secretary General, Mr. Wada.
man ak Secretary General Mr. Wada.
would make the same arguments.
danañu def nag benn wax bi rek.
both in cabinet and in council meetings.
ci cabinet ak council meeting bi.
To the extent that at some stage.
ba ci yenn jamono.
Yaya Jammeh said that I, the Attorney General, was now Abu Dentin's defense lawyer.
man Attorney General di ministre bi saytu wàlli loi bi maay lawyer yi Abu Dentin.
I also remember Dr. Lendi Peters.
mos naa fàttali ko Dr. Lendi Peters.
Came to my house.
mu ñëw suma néeg.
One late Saturday afternoon.
benn samedi ci ngoon.
And informed me that Mr. Kenneth Best.
ne Mr. Kenneth Best.
editor of the Daily Observer.
ki nga xam ne nii mooy ki jiite buntu bi segg nag li ñu bind ci kayiti xibaar yi Daily Observer.
had been picked up and no one knew where he was taken to.
ne jàpp nañ ko te kenn xamul fan lañ ko denca.
I also telephoned Mr. Wada. It was a Saturday.
ma téléphone Mr. Wade lu bési samedi la.
He was still in his office.
mu ngi woon ci office am.
And I drove with Dr. Peters to his office at the State House.
ma ànd ak Dr. Peters ak moom ci dem State House.
Dr. Peters explained the situation.
Dr. Peters waxal ko mbir mi.
And I expressed my discontent.
ma wone nag suma ñàkk a doylu ci loolu.
And we left Dr. Peters outside Mr. Wada's office.
ñu bàyyi nag Dr. Peters si office Mr. Wada.
And Mr. Wada and I went to the State House and met the chairman.
ñu ànd nag dem gis chairman bi.
We told him what we've been told by Dr. Peters.
ñu wax ko nag li nga xam ne loolu la ñu Dr. Peters wax.
He confirmed.
By chairman you mean
Yaya Jammeh.
Yaya Jammeh mooy suñu chairman rek Yaya Jammeh la wax.
He confirmed that Mr. Kenneth Best had been picked up.
ci la ñu wareel nag ne Mr. Kenneth Best del dinañ ko jàpp.
And was at the time detained at the Kartong police station.
jamono jooju ñu ngi ko jàpp fële ca Kartong police station.
We pleaded for his release.
ñu dal di waxtaan nag neexal ko ci wàllu ñu bàyyi ko.
He didn't accept that he would be released or not, but we pleaded for his release.
waaye nag waxu diggalutoon na ne dañ ko bàyyi wala déet waaye nag ñaanoon nañ pour ñu bàyyi ko.
Only later to know that Kenneth Best had been deported.
pour xam nag léegi rek ci lu tuuti rek ñu xam ne daal ndeke Kenneth Best génne nañ ko ci réew mi.
But at this stage, did the Ministry of Justice pay attention to the issue of the ownership of the Daily Observer?
waaye jamono boobu ndax Ministry of Justice bàyyi woon nañ xel ci moomeef ñi nga xam ne ñoo moom Daily Observer.
At that time, at the time that I was at the Ministry of Justice, I didn't think that inquiry, I don't know anything about that.
ci jamono bi nga xam ne maa nekk
It must have been
Ministry of
later.
Justice.
I don't know.
Gëstu boobu nag xamoon ci waaye nag xëy na boobu gannaaw loolu la.
Proceed, please.
For immediately after the opening ceremony of the 1995 legal year, in either October or November, could have been November.
Now 1994 nag at mi li nga xam ne moom lañ jagleel wàllu loi biñ koy ubbi.
I went home
ma dem ñibbi.
and soon received a telephone call from Mr. Austin.
ma jàll di jot téléphone call si Mr. Austin.
Who was the Deputy British High Commissioner.
moo toppoon nag ci kilifa gi toogal nguuri Angleterre fii ci réew mi.
That the former ministers had been picked up.
ne yeneen ministres yi dañ leen jàpp.
A little later,
ci ab diir bu gàtt rek.
Mr. Ndondi Njai, NS Njai, another former teacher,
Mr. Ndondi Njai koo xam ne ni NS teacher la woon.
drove to my house
mu ñëw suma kër.
and told me at the door
mu wax ma nag ci bunti kër gi.
that as he passed the war cemetery,
bi mu rombee nag ci war cemetery bi.
he saw Alaji Yaya Sise
mu gis Alaaji Yaya Cissé.
being picked up
ñu ngi ko jàpp.
from his house near the war cemetery.
ci boori këram gi nekkee ci boori war cemetery bi.
My driver had gone home,
boobu nag suma dawalkat bi ñibbi na.
but I called Bolong Sonko,
ma oo Bolong Sonko.
who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
moom moo nekkoon ministre bi saytu woon wàllu
I
doxalin bitim réew.
informed him of the situation reported to me
ci laa ko wax na liñ ma yëgal.
and asked him to come to my house.
ci laa ko wax mu ñëw suma néeg.
And we'll go together to the State House and see the chairman, Yaya Jammeh.
pour ñu dem nag State House ñu gisanteeg chairman bi Yaya Jammeh.
Bolong came,
bi Bolong ñëwee nag.
and as the driver had gone home,
comme
my
que driver
official
bi ñibbi
driver,
na suma oto bi.
I drove in my private car
ci laa jël nag suma oto bopp dawal
with
ko.
Bolong Sonko up to the gate of the State House in Banjul.
ànd ak Bolong Sonko ba ci buntu State House bi.
We identified ourselves to the state guards
ñu wane suñu bopp ci State Guard gi.
and asked that we wanted to see the chairman, Yaya Jammeh.
won ko nag ne ñun dañ bëggoon a gisanteeg chairman bi Yaya Jammeh.
The state guard pointed out that that would not be possible
ci la ñu wan nag ne loolu mënta am.
because the chairman, Yaya Jammeh, was sleeping.
ndax jamono boobu Yaya Jammeh mu ngi nelaw.
We asked him to wake him up and tell him that we are at the gate waiting to see him urgently.
dañ ko wax ne ko mu dem ko ndax boobu ñun ñu ngi toog di ko xaar.
He pointed out he would dare not do that.
ci la ñu wan la xalaatut koo def.
Then we asked him to let us in and let him show us the room where Yaya Jammeh was sleeping.
ci lañ ko wax ne ko gunge ñu nga dem wan ñu ci néeg bi Yaya Jammeh tëdd.
He said he wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that.
ci la ñu wax ne loolu xalaatut ko sax du ko def.
Then we asked them to let us in and we'll knock every door until we find where the chairman was sleeping.
dañ ko wax ne ko léegi may ñu dugg ñu koŋ-koŋ buntu bu ne rek bañ tombeel ban buntu la.
They said if they were mad enough to do that,
ne bu fekkee ne dof nañ pour def loolu.
they would not know whether we will survive it.
ñoom xëy na sax duñ xam daal ñoom dana leen ji.
They would not know that we who had come would survive, but they would not survive it.
amul ndax ñoom dana leen jig de ñoom ñi demoon waaye nag ñoom ñi leen may ñu dem def loolu ñoom duñ ko du leen jig.
Bolong Sonko and I drove off, left, and went to the golf course residence where the Minister of Interior, Sadibou Haidara, lived.
man ak Bolong Sonko na ñu génn foofu daal di dem ci fii Sadibou Haidara nekk.
At the golf course residence.
ci golf course residence bi.
But the wife explained to us that Sadibou had not yet arrived home.
We
stood at the gate discussing whether to go or wait for him. Sadibou arrived. And we explained the seriousness of the situation, especially for me, that this was immediately after the legal year, with all the pronouncements we've made, that the former ministers have been picked up, and we didn't know where they were. He asked us to drive with him to go and meet the Vice Chairman, Sana Sabali. It was some few hundred yards away. We drove in our separate vehicles to the residence of the Vice Chairman, Sana Sabali. When we explained this and the urgency of their release of the former ministers, Sana Sabali, the Vice Chairman, was very uncooperative. The Minister of Energy of Sierra Leone was staying with him at the time, who was on a visit here. But the vehement argument we made for the release of the former ministers was so strong that the Sierra Minister of Energy, who was staying with him, stood up at the dining table and said, in Sierra Leone, if you had an Attorney General like this one, you would not have suffered the terrible situations we did. Drove Balang Sonko and I feeling very distressed. I had to go back to my home where he picked his vehicle and went home. The next morning, I didn't wait for my official driver to come from Birkama. I drove in my private car to the State House. Straight to the chairman's office, Yaya Jammeh, and pointed out the terrible situation we have had and the efforts we have made about these ministers who have been detained. He said he didn't know. Immediately called Sana Sabali, the Vice Chairman, who confirmed that the former ministers have been picked up and were either at the Mile 2 precinct or at the NIA headquarters. The chairman, Yaya Jammeh, ordered for their release immediately and asked me to proceed straight to the NIA headquarters and witness the release of the former ministers. As I arrived at the gate, I saw Sana Sabali, Vice Chairman, and Sadibou Haidara, Minister of Interior, walking into the NIA office. I followed them to the room where the ministers formerly were detained. I witnessed Sana Sabali making a fierce address to the former ministers. And eventually ordered for the release of all of them except O.J. Jallow. As I walked out, I met the Minister of Health, Fatoumata Jallow Tambajang. And I asked him to talk to the Vice Chairman and persuade him to release O.J. Jallow. O.J. was eventually released.
Of course, Mr. Mbai, did you receive any information as to what might have happened to these ministers during that brief period of their detention?
Ndax jot na am ben xibaar bu aju ci lan mo dalon nak ministre yi dir bu gatta bobu nga xamne ñu ngi leen tiyé won ben place?
No, my concern was they should be released. I didn't know what was happening to them, but that they should be released.
Man li ma soxalon rek mo nek dañ leen warona bayyi xawma nak na.
So then that I called the Secretary General.
Ci loolu na ci la call Secretary General
bi. Should seek to meet the chairman.
Pour nak mu daldi ma jokkale ak chairman bi.
And that meeting,
ci meeting bobu,
led to the meeting of the council with the former ministers at the cabinet office in State House.
moo tax nag council members yi ñoom ñu amoon meeting ak ministre yi ne fa nekkoon ci jamono jooju.
Hassan Jallow in his memoir.
Hassan Jallow nag ci ay bindam.
Journey for Justice.
li ñuy wax Journey for Justice.
Refer to that meeting.
daal dina wane ne meeting boobu.
In page 622.
di fooy juróom-benn téeméer ak ñaar fukk ak ñaar.
Where he said.
fi mu fa waxee ne.
The chairman also warned us against engaging in any hostile propaganda or any action which might be prejudicial to public order.
te ci lañu chairman bi nag dankaafu nag ne na ñu bàyyi xel ci loo xam ne nii daal buñ ko defee mën naa indi féewaloo wala jaxasoo ci réew mi.
Or tranquility, etc.
ak loo xam ne nii dana xejamal dal ak jàmm fii ci réew mi.
He said we were all free to go about our businesses and to work to earn a living.
ci lañu wax ne ñun ñëpp mën nañoo dem na toppatoo ji suñuy aajo def na loo xam ne mën nañ cee dund.
That henceforth will be dealt with not as a group or former ministers, but on an individual basis.
waaye nag duñ seqoo loo xam ne ñun ay ministre lañ woon waaye kenn ku nekk daal si saawa si boppam.
And held responsible for our individual actions.
te kon bu boobaa nag lépp lu waay def daal yaa koy gàddu sa bopp.
Then Justice Jallow added, divide and rule, I thought.
ci la Justice Jallow wax ne daal loolu nag mooy xaajale ak dogal.
Continuing, he said, let me finish this. Continuing, he said, he then, that's the chairman, he then asked if any council member had anything to add.
ci la laaj nag council member yi amul kenn koo xam ne am na looy laajte.
They all declined.
ñoom ñëpp kenn laajtewut.
Except Fafa.
ba mu des Fafa.
The Attorney General.
Attorney General.
Who not surprisingly looked ill at ease.
nga xam ne ni daal amul dara loo xam ne ni seet na ko ci.
He briefly spoke on the need to respect human rights.
waaw ne daal lii dañ war a cëral nag yelleefi doomu aadama.
I've made copies of this page available.
page boobu nag def naa ko ay sottandeku naa ko.
We will take note of that excerpt, Mr. Mbai. Page 662, isn't
622.
it? 622 of Mr. Jallo's book.
Yeah.
Journey for Justice. Do you recall the date of this meeting?
No, I cannot recall it.
You can't recall. It's not.
I know. You know, they were picked up after the legal year ceremony. That was on a Sunday.
Sunday, yes.
Yeah, and we continued the protest when we went to State House, couldn't get access to the chairman, Jame. We went to the Minister of the Interior, and eventually ended up with the Vice Chairman, Sana Sabali, who was uncooperative. And distressed as we were, it was Monday that the secretary and I met the chairman, and that led to the meeting of the council with the former ministers. But I can't remember, I don't know the date, I can't remember the date of the meeting of the council with the former ministers. But the result was, and the reference here is just to emphasize my anthem on the need to observe and respect human rights. And that has been my passion throughout.
And there were other violations that you...
Oh, yes.
Apply Conte?
Yes. Dr. Abdoulaye Conte.
Dr. Abdoulaye Conte.
Former Vice President of Sierra Leone until the military coup in that country.
Nga xamne ni mo nekkon former Vice President bu Sierra Leone.
Came to the Gambia on exile.
dafa dawon laqku ci fi ci rewi Gambia.
And eventually enrolled as a legal practitioner in my chambers.
te mujjé gi sax muy liggéey ak man ci suma chamber bi ne lawyer.
He had a very successful practice.
Nekk na ko xamne ni ku sotaloon liggéeyam la.
Almost taking the role of a consultant.
Nga xamne ni jamono boobu mu ngi nekk consultant mu ngi def wàll woowu.
Until one day, whilst he was in one of the courts in Banjul, I don't know which.
jamono nag nga xam ne mu ngi woon ci benn ci court ci Banjul xam nag ban la ci.
He was arrested by the police.
Police yi ci lañ ko jàpp.
And detained at the Banjul police station.
ñu dal di ko teg nag ci Banjul police station.
All efforts.
parce que bépp
jéego were refused.
dal di woon nañ ko bañal.
What was
even his wife? Even his wife.
soxnaam sax day.
Who took food for him was not allowed to see him and deliver the food.
moom mi nga xam daf ko yóbbuloon lekk sax nangu ñoon mu gis ko.
And he therefore rightly refused to eat. He refused to eat.
ci kaw loolu nag mu bañ a lekk.
He was eventually released.
gannaaw gi ci lañ ko bàyyi.
in order to leave the country within 24 hours.
nee na génn ci réew mi ci diiram ñaar fukki waxtu ak ñeent.
He quickly left for Ziguinchor.
ci la génn dem Ziguinchor.
Took the flight to Dakar.
jël plane dem Dakar.
And then to the United States.
dal di dem United States.
What was he
had an adopted daughter.
Let me
finish. He had an adopted daughter.
The
The American embassy gave him a visa immediately.
American
That was why
embassy
he was able to proceed to the United States.
The
question of the adopted daughter was an issue. So the wife chose to stay with the family, including this adopted daughter, for almost a year before they were able to eventually join him.
Dr.
Abdoulaye Conte later became the Chief Justice of Belize.
Chief Justice of Belize.
Now you are saying what was his crime?
Yes, what was he charged with?
Afterwards, I understood that there was a complaint from the Sierra Leone government. That there were certain articles appearing in their newspapers said to have been authored by Leo. The person who wrote it signed as Leo. His name Leo. And they suspected that these articles were by Dr. Abdoulaye Conte. So the complaint was made to this government. And they called him, which he denied. But there was the threat to send him back to Sierra Leone. And the wife telephoned the Commonwealth Secretary General, the Nigerian. What's the name? It was Nigerian? Nigerian Commonwealth Secretary General.
Commonwealth Secretary General.
And informed him. And the president of Guinea-Conakry, Lansana Conte, who said if the plane lands in Freetown, in Guinea, they will dislodge him from the plane. Because it was sure that if Conte returned to Sierra Leone, he may be killed. This was my understanding after the event. When he had
Interesting. That would have been contrary to the refugee conventions.
Then come to the National Consultative Committee.
The National Consultative Committee.
At cabinet and council meetings, when the issue of a timetable was being discussed, the idea of a National Consultative Committee was raised. It was agreed that I make out a list of names for its composition for the consideration of the cabinet and council. I did, and the list was accepted. I'm proud to say that Dr. Baba Galle Jallo was a member of that committee. I consulted each and every one of the persons I invited, and they all agreed to serve the interests of the nation. Dr. Lendy Peters was the chairman.
Dr. Lendy Peters was chairman
of the committee. And Mr. Surata B.S. Jani, the deputy chairman.
Mr. Surata Jani was deputy chairman.
The committee went around the country and consulted the people as to how long the military should stay in power. The committee did a good job and recommended 2 years. But the council members, especially the chairman, Yaya Jammeh, were not interested in the work of the consultative committee. Sometimes became openly hostile to the whole idea. The chairman, Yaya Jammeh, in fact called it the National Clowns Committee. At some stage, I felt so bad that I pointed out my disappointment in cabinet so vehemently that after the beating, the Secretary General advised me in his office to try to overlook the comments of the chairman.
Ci kaw loolu nag daal dama daan dingat mbir moom mu gannaaw meeting bi nag ci la ma secrétaire général oo ne naa di bàyyi xel nag li nga xam ne nii mooy kàddooy chairman bi.
I became absolutely frustrated and restless.
jamono jooju nag ma jaaxle lool te tamit daal amatuma dara lu ma def.
That was when the idea to perform the Umrah, which I had promised to do the previous Hajj, came to mind.
Ci jamono boobu nag ci laa xalaat nag li ma xalaatoon ne dinaa doon dem aji ci déwén ci daaw ja ma xalaat ne ma def ko ni ki ren jooju.
I sought and was given special leave and left in February 1995 for the Umrah in the last 10 days of Ramadan.
Ci la dal di bindu nag ñu may mën a fukki fan ma dal di def Umrah ji.
And returned home in early March 1995.
Ma ñib si waat nag ci ki weeru njëkk fan yu njëkk ci weeri March 1995.
Dismissal and detention.
ñu dal di ma dàq dal di ma jàpp.
My appointment as Attorney General Minister of Justice was terminated with immediate effect.
Suma tànneef nag dañ ma dàqoon ci saasi.
In a 2-sentence letter dated 20 March 1995.
Letter boo xam ne ni de ñaari bind rek la kàddu daal lañ ci wax.
I have a copy of the letter.
Please provide it.
Yes.
Na sax letter boobu.
Yeah, both the letter of appointment and dismissal are contained in this file. I'll be presenting them.
Okay.
The same afternoon,
Ci benn bëccëg bi.
Daba Marena and Samba Ba
Daba Marena ak Samba Ba.
of the NIA
jóge ko ci NIA bi.
walked into the office to supervise the handing over to Mr. Mustafa Maron.
Ci la ñëw ci office bi nag pour seet nag naka laa jébbalee place ministre boobu ci loxoom Mustafa Maron.
They searched my table and drawers.
ñu seet nag suma table bi ak sumay drawer yëpp.
Refused me to take anything,
ñu bañ ne daal du ma yóbbuwaale dara.
including the two memoranda of understanding I had referred to earlier.
bokk na ci sax di ñaari nangatoo yooyu nga xam ne ni moom lañ bindoon.
The one that I signed with the chairman stipulating the conditions of my acceptance. I have already referred to that.
waaw mooy bi nga xam ne ni moom laa nangatoo nag chairman bi ñu signé ko.
Let me see, Mr. Chair. After my termination,
gannaaw buñ ma dàqee.
my arrest from the house and detention at the NIA
buñ ma jàppee nag suma néeg suma kër jool di ma teg benn place
became almost a routine.
mu jéggi daal mu doon jikko rek.
Be it sometimes by both Daba Marena and Samba Ba.
mu jéggi benn daal muy Daba Marena ak Samba Ba yëpp.
And at times by either of them.
léegoo léegi nag kenn ci ñoom moo koy def.
This was a traumatizing and traumatizing period, especially for my 3 little children who were staying with me.
lii nag nekk na loo xam ne daal lu métti la woon rawatina suma ñetti doom yi nga xam ne ñu ngi toogoon ak man dëkkoon ak man.
The day after my termination from office,
bés gannaaw buñ ma dàqee ci office bi.
Mr. Robert Collingwood, Ambassador of the European Union and head of the delegation of the European Commission to the Gambia.
ki nga xam ne moo toogaloon mbootaay tugal gi nga xam ne European Union fii ci réewi Gambia.
In a personal letter dated 21 March 1995 wrote.
ci leetar boo xam ne bind na ko niki benn fan ci weeri March 1995 mu ne.
My dear Fafa.
My dear Fafa.
It was much personal sadness.
nekk na nag ak naqar goo xam ne nii mu ngi jógee ci man.
As well as professional disappointment.
ki tamit nag loo xam ne nii daal dina bettu nag lu aju ci wàllu liggéey bu sell.
That I heard of your sudden departure from office yesterday.
dégg naa nag sa génn ak liggéey ci office bi ndiki démb.
Although I cannot pretend to be in any way surprised at what happened.
te naam nag mënuma lëbatu rek ne tax ne li xew na bettun ma.
I have to say that I most regretted
naqaru naa itamit nag.
the manner of your going.
ni nga xamee noonu nga génne.
The wording of the announcement.
ak itamit ni nga xamee noonu lañ ko yébaane.
And above all.
ak lépp daal.
The lack of any public recognition.
ci li nga xam ne yow lañ ñàkk nag li nga xam ne mooy taxawaay nit ñi.
of the remarkable services.
ak liggéey bu rafet bi nga xam ne nii.
that you gave your country.
nga xam ne moom nga defal sa réew.
as a minister.
ne ministre nga.
Please allow me therefore to record my own appreciation
mais ma nag ma daal di sësale nag li nga xam ne mooy lu ma doyloo ci sa
all that you have accomplished over the past few months.
liggéey yi nga xam ne yëpp motal nga ko ci weer yi ñu jox gannaaw.
I shall particularly remember
rawatina nag ñi nga xam ne ñoo bokk.
your professionalism.
ci li nga xam ne mooy ni màcc ci sa liggéey.
You're never feeling courtesy towards us sometimes troublesome diplomats.
ak ni nga xam ne nii mooy sa diggante bu ratax diggante ñi nga xam ne ay kilifa yu toogal yeneen i réew lañ.
Your personal encouragement and advice.
ak ni nga xam ne noonu nga daan xiirtale nit ñi ak itamit li nga leen daan digal.
I hope that in spite of the circumstances, we'll continue to see each other often.
yaakaar naa sa emende ak li xew yëpp day saay bu ne deñ mun di gisante.
And in the meantime, I offer my very best wishes.
te it maa ngi laa àggalil sumay ina ak sumay ñaan.
Yourself and your family for the future.
yu rafet mu jëm ci yow ak sa njaboot ak sa ëllëg.
Yours ever, Robert.
ki ko bind nag mooy Robert.
I have a copy of the letter.
am naa leetar boobu.
We will take a copy. We will take a look at it.
Yes.
Was that the end of your? Well, you have also received. Your sacking, Mr. Mbai, was also documented in Gambian newspaper.
Yes. In fact, that's what I'm coming to. The veteran educationists.
ñi nga xam ne nii ñooy borom jàngkat yu borom xam-xam yi.
Mr. S.H.M. Jones.
Mr. S.H.M. Jones.
was Director of Education even before independence.
moo nekkoon Director of Education naam sax balaa independence.
In an article after I was relieved of the post of Attorney and Minister of Justice.
gannaaw boo xamee ne nag génnee nañ ma ci palaasi ministre bi saytu woon wàllu loi.
She titled The Sacking of Ministers of Government. Must it always be thus?
ci la wax tamit nag ne dàq ak ministre waxtu lu ne rek ak ngoon lay nekk.
Published on page 6 of the Daily Observer on Monday, April 24, 1995.
ñu dal di ko génne nag ci Daily Observer altine 1990.
Reacted to the glares of adverse publicity.
tey tamit nag nga xam ne ni nag dal di nañu ko siiwal.
Reported in the Gambia Daily.
wane ko ci Gambia Daily.
The government's own mouthpiece in its issue of Friday, 24 March 1995.
ñi wax na ci làmmeñu nguur gi ni nga xam ne ni loolu nañ ko ni ko aljuma.
And among other things,
ak yeneen ni mel.
including his confidence in me,
ak li nga xam ne ni mooy kóoluteem ci moom.
my hard work,
suma liggéey.
achievements,
ak yi nga xam ne lu laa sottal
professionalism,
ak li màcce si suma liggéey.
expressed the deep unease this had caused him.
tey tamit lii nga xam ne ni daal métti gi dal na ci kawam.
I have a copy of that newspaper.
am naa nag copy newspaper boobu.
I will list this as one of the documents you would provide.
Yes.
So at the end of your testimony, we will receive all those documents.
Yes.
All right.
Maybe without, I don't want to lose my humility, but I want to quote part of what Uncle Sam Jones said.
Please, go ahead.
He said, meanwhile, at the first one, meanwhile, at the time of going to press, police confirmed that Mr. Mbai had been released on bail.
Police dëggal nañ ñoo nag ne Mr. Mbai bàyyi nañ ko ci sartaay bail.
Unlike your columnist,
ci li nga xam ne nag mu uute nag ak seen jëf.
Adama of Private Eye.
Adama of Private.
I know Mr. Mbai well over 25 years ago.
am naa Mr. Mbai lu weesu ñaar fukki at ak juróom ci gannaaw.
I presided over the meeting of the scholarship committee, advice committee, which recommended him for the award of a Gambia government scholarship.
bokk naa ci jotaay ñi nga xam ne ni ba nga xam ne ni joxoon nañ ko kees goo xam ne ni nag mooy fay ak njàngam.
I need hardly state that subsequently,
tey tamit naa daan wane nag ni lu munti mel.
he more than amply justified the committee's recommendation to the Minister of Education of the day.
dal di ci ràññee gi nga xam ne ni dal di comité bi ràññee woon na ko.
Fafa Edrissa Mbai is a very learned man.
Fafa Edrissa Mbai borom xam-xam la.
He has a string of impressive academic qualifications from 2 reputable universities. Reputable British universities.
na njàng mu fort moo xam ne ni ci ñaari university yoo xam ne ñu ngi nekkee ci réewi Angleterre yu ñu ràññee si àdduna bi.
Bachelor of Arts combined honors of Kiel University.
ci li nga xam ne loolu la tudd léegi nii nga xam ne ni am na ci maqaamam.
Master of Arts International Politics of the same university.
ci lim tudd noonu ci benn university bi.
Bachelor of Laws honors of the University of London.
ci li nga xam ne loolu la tudd noonu ci ay maqaama ci benn university
Barrister law and member of the Middle Temple Inns of Court.
li nga xam ne loolu la tudd noonu ci wàlli xam-xam bi muy jàng.
I've never seen him in action, so to speak, in court, in a court of law.
Musuma gis nag ay jéego wala loo xam ne wax na ko ci lu ñaaw ci court yi.
And I am not in any way qualified to comment on his competence as a lawyer.
nde tamit ama dara loo xam ne nii war naa ko mën a wax sax.
However,
ci wàllu liggéeyam ndax wér na ci mbiri lawyer.
However,
lu ci mënti xew.
the outcome of the Louis Dias case against the government of the Gambia.
li nga xam ne nii moo faxeekoo nag ci Louis Dias case bi ci ak nguuri Gambia.
which he handled before his recent appointment in the AFPRC administration.
nga xam ne nag daal dina ko ti nag ci jamono balaa ñu koy tànn ci AFPRC nguuram.
speaks for itself.
loolu feeñ na ci moom.
It is an eloquent tribute.
nekk na nag ndollal boo xam ne ni bu wér la.
his industry, perseverance, and professional competence.
ci liggéey ak tamit nag li nga xam ne nii moo nekk seen màcc ak liggéey.
in addition to a busy law practice.
ci yokk ci nag li nga xam ne nii moo nekk yaxamtum loi.
which he has built up over the years.
xam ne ni nag dal dina si taxaw lu yàgg ci ay at yi ñu jog gannaaw.
Mr. Mbai has found time to write 2 books.
Mr. Mbai nag dal dina bind ñaari book.
in the service of my beliefs.
ci li nga xam ne nii mooy service of my belief.
the Senegambian Insight.
Senegambian Insight.
He tells us that he has 3 more on the stocks.
tey tamit wax na ne am na ñetteel boo xam ne mu ngi ko war a def.
University essays in politics.
University essays in politics.
B.
ñaareel bi.
Senegambia, a geohistorical, socio-economic and political study.
di nafar boo xam ne mu ngi jëm ci diggante ci Gambia Senegambia fii.
And C. Senegambia, the confederation that never was.
tey tamit mooy Senegambia confederation boo xam ne ni amutoon.
This will be published in due course.
yoo xam ne ni danañ ko wane ci dugg bañ a yàgg.
Mr. Mbai has the unique distinction of having twice served as Attorney General and Minister of Justice in the government of this country and twice sacked from that exalted office.
Mr. Mbai nag am na loo xam ne nii nag bariwut ci maas ne nekk ñaari yoon ministre boo xam ne mooy saytu wàlli nguur gi loi bi ci réew mi ci ñaari nguur bokkut.
He will no doubt concur with me when I say that those who scale the greasy pole of politics ought to know of the perils and hazards associated with that exercise.
danañ ànd ak man ne bu fekkee ne wax naa bokk na ci ñi nga xam ne ñoo yëkkati politique ca kaw.
Mr. Mbai is a man of great ambition.
Mr. Mbai nag nekk nag ni koo xam ne ni ku am pas-pas la.
Phenomenal memory.
ki tamit nag xel mu sell.
Prodigious industry.
ak li nga xam ne mooy liggéey bu wér.
And last but by no means the least.
te li mujjee te lu néew daal li gën a tuuti it.
He is a man of great modesty.
nekk na ni koo xam ne nag ni ku tuux lay tamit.
I feel it will be helpful.
dama yaakaar ne de danañu mën a dimbale de.
For our readers to know these facts about Mr. Mbai.
pour suñ jàngkat yi ñu ñiy jàng kay yi ñu xam ne lii ci mbiri Mr. Mbai.
Before I proceed with my case.
balaa maay continuer ak suma case.
On and on and on and on. The principles are available.
On that note, Mr. Chair, we take the usual break, 2 o'clock break. Thank you.
ci kaw loolu nag ñu ne dañuy noppaleku comme ni ñu daan def rek.
Thank you very much, Emma Council, and thank you very much, Ekodoke Fafa Mbai, for your testimony. We will take a break and come back at 3 o'clock sharp. Meeting's adjourned.